Hey y'all, and welcome to another election analysis. Today I'll be looking at the election from British Columbia, which is a province in Canada. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with my takeaways from this campaign. So first off, the NDP won a majority government with 57 out of the 87 seats, flipping 16. The BC Liberals went down from 41 to 28, and the Greens held their 2 seats. Looking at the province-wide popular vote, the NDP gained 7 points, the Liberals lost 7, and the Greens stayed steady at 15. So the NDP did call this election unexpectedly and in the middle of a pandemic, but it didn't seem to hurt them. Heading into this election, the Greens had just elected a new leader 1 week prior, and former Green Party leader Andrew Weaver had endorsed the NDP. A lot of people thought the Greens might get wiped off the map, but then Sonia Furstenau had a strong debate performance. The Greens ended up holding on to 2 seats. They gained ground in Vancouver ridings, and they came just 0.2% of the vote away from flipping West Vancouver sea to sky. They're definitely going to target that district in the next election in 4 years. So I want to illustrate something. I want to illustrate something real quick. So in British Columbia politics, these are the 3 main parties. But in federal politics, there are 4. So usually whoever wins an election in BC politics is whoever can really win over those federal liberal voters. So in this election, the NDP did very well. They had a very big tent. They won a lot of votes from federal liberal voters. And then usually if the BC Liberals do well, that means they dominated those federal liberal voters, since the BC Liberals are kind of right in between where the Liberals and Conservatives are federally. So I just wanted to illustrate that. Next up, this province has simply shifted to the left. British Columbia is young, diverse, growing, and progressive. For much of the 21st century, BC has elected conservative-leaning premiers, but that's changing. People approved of Premier Horgan's handling of COVID-19, both on the front of health and safety and on the front of relief for struggling British Columbians. And Dr. Bonnie Henry is very popular. BC Liberals were criticized for their tough on crime approach, especially in a year when many British Columbians went out and protested for Black Lives Matter. It just didn't resonate. And then the BC Liberals also came under fire for the lack of gender diversity in their party. The last 3 years of a Green NDP coalition were not as disastrous as many moderates had feared. The BC Liberals did propose a 1-year suspension of the PST, or the provincial sales tax, but it didn't seem to help them as much as they thought. Not only is this a growing province demographically, but also economically. BC has one of the strongest and fastest growing economies in all of Canada. Also, Premier Horgan is the most popular premier in Canada. And Horgan stood up for BC on environmental issues to the best of his ability. Also, the BC NDP accomplished 79% of its promises in the 3-year term, according to the CBC. So they were very productive. They were not just sitting around in government. So they made their base very happy. They gave them a lot of reasons to turn out and put them back into power. So now let's meet the parties. You got the Liberals, right? Led by Andrew Wilkinson. They held 41 seats at dissolution. They governed BC from 2001 to 2017. They lost now 2 elections in a row. The NDP came into this election with 41 seats. They have not won a majority government since 1996. So it was about time. And the Green Party, led by Sonia Furstenau, held 2 seats at dissolution. They ran candidates in all ridings but 13. They held the balance of power from 2017 to 2020, back during the minority government when they were in a coalition with the NDP. They still do very, very well. They still won 15% of the vote in this election. Libertarian Party ran 25 candidates. They're kind of similar to the American Libertarians. They've never really had any success here in BC. The Conservative Party, led by Trevor Bolin, they ran 19 candidates. They haven't won a seat since 1975. They never win seats, but they definitely did vote split. And I'll talk about that later on in the video. Christian Heritage Party, led by Laura Lynn Tyler Thompson, They never usually do too well. They ran 5 candidates. Communist Party ran 5 candidates. They've never won a seat in BC history. The BC Vision Party kind of competes with a lot of Green voters. They have a very similar platform and vision for the future of British Columbia. And they're very new, formed in 2013. And the Whigs of BC, very new party. They support a referendum on independence from Canada. They ran 2 candidates. And finally, the Royal BC Party, led by Jonathan Van Barneveld, ran 1 candidate. They're still very small. They formed 2 years ago, and they advocate for rural voters in BC. So that's a look at the parties. So now I want to show you what I do. Here's what I did. I took all this data from the election, made it look all pretty, made some spreadsheets, as well as some charts and graphs, and then I present them in these PowerPoints. So now we're going to take a look at a district by district analysis of what happened in this election. So without further ado, I present to you BC 2020. So first off, the BC NDP flipped 16 seats. Half of those seats that they flipped were in just 2 regions, the Fraser Valley and Richmond and Delta, in particular Richmond. So I'm going to talk about those 2 areas, which are typically liberal strongholds. And that is why you can see that the NDP goes from under 50% of the seats to nearly 2/3 over the course of a 3-year period. And as you can see, they gained a lot of ground. Now, the swings graph right here shows you in each district who gained the most ground and who lost the most ground. As you can see, the Liberals and Greens are down in a lot of districts. This is a color code for my PowerPoint. Each party has a color. This was an interesting district because Trevor Bolin and the Conservative Party did very well here. They're a minor party that has no seats, but they came in second place and got over 1/3 of the vote. Similar situation in Peace River South. The vote splitting didn't hurt the BC Liberals, but it was still very significant. Moving on to Stikine, Nathan Cullen is a new member of the NDP. He has served in Parliament federally for the NDP, but he is going to be entering the legislature as a new member with a lot of experience as one of the most famous members of the NDP over the past decade or so. The Kootenays are the Rockies of Southeast British Columbia. Here's an overview of what happened in that region. The NDP ran a former federal member of parliament, Wayne Stetsky, but this district was just too conservative for him to have a chance. He got demolished or destroyed, I guess I'd say. The Conservatives split votes away from the Liberals, and the Greens came in second here. So as you can see, look at the Conservatives gaining 8, Liberals are down 13 because they share similar bases. Nelson Creston, Greens did very, very well out here. And then once again, we're in a situation where there was a slight vote split. The NDP flipped Boundary Similkameen and Vernon Monashee in this region. So this is Boundary Similkameen, big flip for the NDP. And what happened here was that literally the Conservatives and the Whigs Party split votes away from the Liberals. So probably would have been a 50-50 battle if it hadn't been for the vote splitting. And then the lack of a Green candidate also really helped the NDP. If the Greens were running, they would have probably won at least 10, maybe 15% of the vote. Now we're gonna look at Vernon-Monashee. This was another seat that was flipped by the NDP. It was very, very close, but look again. Look at the Conservative Party with 12% of the vote. Liberals were down 13. They would have gotten 48% of the vote if the Conservatives hadn't run. So that was a very, very significant district, because if it hadn't been for the Conservative Party running here, the Liberals would have won. And that's why a lot of people think that the BC Liberals need to merge or do something to figure out why they keep losing votes to the Conservatives, because the BC Liberals are a conservative party. Fraser Valley, this was a very interesting region because Fraser Valley, this is where Abbotsford is. And typically the Fraser Valley is very reliable for the Liberal Party. Not this time. And in fact, 5 out of the 16 seats that the NDP flipped in this election were in the Fraser Valley alone. And that was a majority of the seats in the Fraser Valley, 5 out of the 9. So the NDP flipped this seat in Abbotsford Mission. Why? Vote splitting once again by the Conservative Party. Trevor Hamilton winning 8% of the vote. This is an interesting seat because Laura Lynn Tyler Thompson originally ran against Jagmeet Singh in the federal by-election for Burnaby South. Now she ran up in Abbotsford, got 8% of the vote. She ran for the PPC last year as well, in 2019. Chilliwack. Once again, the Conservatives cost the BC Liberals a seat. They're up 16. The Liberals are down 19. The NDP wins in a tight three-way race. Lord Thornes made some controversial comments. He actually made a sexist comment against somebody from the NDP. And so that allowed for this independent city council member who had deep connections in this district to really get a lot of the vote, and the NDP to come in and take this seat. This was an NDP flip. Mary Polak was the floor leader of the BC Liberals, so they lost a big high-ranking member here. This was an NDP flip. The Conservatives cost the Liberals another seat as Margaret Kuntz drew critics for voting against a rainbow sidewalk to honor the LGBTQ community. The NDP flipped Surrey Cloverdale, and 58% of Surrey is made up of members of a visible minority. So this is why it's so progressive. This was an NDP flip in Surrey Cloverdale. Big win for the NDP. The Greens may have helped split votes away from the NDP and helped the Liberals barely hold on to this seat by just 4%. Richmond and Delta, this was very important because the NDP ended up flipping Richmond Queensborough, Richmond South Center, and Richmond Steveston. Richmond is typically a liberal stronghold. So it was very, very big, and it was a huge storyline that liberals not only won a majority of the popular vote here in Richmond and Delta, but that they flipped so many seats. Richmond Queensborough. Jas Johal was a very big leader in the BC Liberal Party. That's a tough loss for their caucus. The NDP also flipped this seat. It's a good advantage of the fact that an incumbent wasn't running. Oh, oops. I forgot to point out this flip right here. The lack of the Greens to find a candidate was what ended up contributing to the NDP's victory. Liberals won 49%, just like last time, but that 11% that came from the Greens not running a candidate helped the NDP win this seat. So in Burnaby, New Westminster, and the Tri-Cities, the NDP ended up flipping Coquitlam Burke Mountain. In case you're not familiar with the area, the Tri-Cities are Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam, and Port Moody. Finn Donnelly is a former federal MP. He will now join the provincial NDP, and he also flipped this seat by 19%. So not even close. Oops. In the Vancouver area, most of these districts were already NDP, but the NDP did flip Vancouver Falls Creek. Big flip for the NDP out there. And also, it's significant to point out that in Vancouver, the Greens had a great night. They gained ground in a lot of these districts in Vancouver. The Greens nearly doubled their support in Vancouver Point Grey, going from 10 to 17. The NDP flipped North Vancouver Seymour. And this entire district of the North Shore and Sunshine Coast includes North Vancouver and West Vancouver. This was an NDP flip. The Greens came so close. They were just 45 votes short of winning here in West Vancouver's Sea to Sky. They will definitely target this district in the next election. The NDP flipped Parksville Qualicum in that region. And there it is. A strong finish by the Greens, going to second place. And here's that flip. Sorry, I spoke too soon. NDP gaining 14 points. Liberals are down 10. NDP down, or the Greens are down 9. In the Greater Victoria area, the NDP flipped Oak Bay Gordon Head. This is also home to John Horgan's district. John Horgan won big, and he had a great night for his party. This was that NDP flip. They flipped the seat that was held by former Green leader Andrew Weaver. And Green incumbent Adam Olson ended up winning big, gaining 10 points to win by 23. And so that's it. You can catch all of this data and the PowerPoints on my website, Election Land, and expect a new video on Indiana coming up soon.